I'm standing here outside the Venetian in Las Vegas, Nevada. More importantly, the site of AWS Reinvent 2024, AWS's big cloud event that they host every single year. And this year, they've already made some pretty cool announcements that have pretty big implications for us as developers that we'll get into in a bit, as well as I've been told that it shows some access to interview a few different executives at Amazon and maybe even some other companies. That should be pretty interesting. I'll try to ask them some of the questions that you all ask me so often, and frankly, I don't always have a very good answer for. And then we'll just go try to have some fun in the Expo Hall and all of that and see what interesting things we can get into. And of course, a big thank you to Amazon for bringing me out here and sponsoring this video. Let's go have some fun. All right, so these guys take a short video of you and then it turns it into like this 3D hologram thing. Let's give it a try. All right, so the first step is they just take your picture, I guess, and then they turn you into AI somehow. So just stand there and do anything. Hey, what's up? 7 seconds is a lot longer when you're standing here. Let's go with Bedrock. English conversation. Formal. Let's go with humorous. Activate. Hey, that's me.
Bedrock. You could revolutionize your YouTube.
These things actually look so realistic. It's crazy. All right, that was pretty cool. That was honestly, it's way more realistic than I expected it to be. So it's pretty cool. I absolutely suck at golf, but MongoDB has this like putting green thing. Might have to give it a try. All right, what do I need to do?
The 5 green.
5 green, all right. Go! No, it's short. I'm not good at golf in the slightest. No, way too hard. Go! No, not even close.
Want some teas?
Sure, I'll take some teas.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thanks for playing.
All right, we're not on the leaderboard. I need to practice. All right, so I'm back in my hotel room for a minute just because I wanted to talk a bit about some of the actual announcements that have come from AWS, because there's actually some really cool stuff coming out. And a lot of it that I think can actually have like some pretty substantial implications for us as developers. So I just want to go through a few of them. Of course, I can't touch on every single announcement from the event because there have been a lot of them, but let's talk about a few. Now, probably the most important of the announcements, as they're going to relate to us as developers, are going to be announcements related to Amazon Bedrock as well as Amazon Q Developer. So Bedrock is the tool they have that allows you to sort of build your own AI applications using whatever different models you want to use. There's a bunch of them on Bedrock, and they actually announced some new ones. And then Amazon Q, or specifically Q Developer, is their AI assistant that you can use within your code editor and to do a lot of different developer tasks for you. So one of the big announcements was around Model Distillation, which if you don't know, the idea of Model Distillation is that you have this model that's super powerful, right? It has a lot of capabilities and it can do a lot of things. But the issue with using that model oftentimes is it might be slow or it might be very expensive to actually use. However, if you can create a model that is very specific and tailored to your use case, that model needs less information and thus can be cheaper to run and it can be faster. And Model Distillation is essentially taking one of these very powerful models and having that powerful model actually train the sort of simpler, more specific model for you. And this is actually a technique that's been around for a little while and it does work very well, but the issue is it's actually very difficult to actually do. You typically need some very intelligent machine learning engineers with a lot of knowledge in the space. It's not something that you can just sort of click a button and do. But they are actually bringing Model Distillation to Bedrock, so you're going to be able to do this without needing to have a ton of ML knowledge, some PhD in machine learning or whatever, and it should be much easier to use, and you'll be able to do it with all of these top models like the Anthropic Claude models or the Meta Llama models. And on the topic of Bedrock and just building AI applications in general, one of my sort of issues with it oftentimes is this issue with hallucination. So essentially this is the idea that AI oftentimes is going to hallucinate. It's going to create some information that is not true and it's going to just confidently tell you this incorrect information. And they are claiming that they're going to be much better about this going forward. So specifically, Bedrock now has automated reasoning checks, which they claim can prevent a lot of these hallucinations. Of course, this is something that in a way remains to be seen. We have to see for ourselves how how well it's actually going to work. And I'm very interested to see this myself. But for now, we know that it's something that's coming and it's a good step forward, and we'll have to see sort of how big of a step forward it actually is. But any prevention of this issue is a good thing in my opinion. They also announced 4 new models that are being created by Amazon. So on Bedrock, you can still use all of these different models, but you can also use Amazon's custom built models that they made themselves. So these are called Nova, and there's a bunch of different versions of Nova, depending on sort of how powerful you need it to be compared to how fast and cheap you need it to be, and sort of what types of content you need. So do you need text or multimodal content? And there's all these different versions of the Nova models. I'll be interested to try these out, but from the benchmarks that they showed, it does seem like it's a pretty competitive set of models with all of the models that are already out there from Anthropic and Meta and OpenAI and all of these different companies making models. It seems like these models are going to be at least pretty competitive and fairly cheap to use, at least on Bedrock. So that'll be interesting to see. And with QDeveloper, so the AI coding assistant that Amazon has made, they did have a few pretty cool announcements with this. And I really like these because they're focusing, I think, on the things that AI does really well in software development. And that's sort of doing the work that developers don't oftentimes want to do, but sort of needs to be done. And that is that they're building new agents for unit testing, writing documentation, and code review. And these to me are all very interesting. So first of all, unit testing is something I think AI is very good at, and it just makes sense to have AI agents that can do this for us. Code review is something that I don't know how confident I actually am in it, but it will be cool to see how well it actually works. If it does work well, I think it's something that could work well alongside developers. So we have these AI agents that can do code review, and they can find things that developers wouldn't find, right? They can find things like issues with dependencies you added, whereas you're, as a developer, probably not going to go that deep into a code review most of the time unless it's something super important. So that's something that I think AI can actually do better. And then we as developers can focus on things like the business logic and make sure that is correct in the code review. And writing documentation, of course, is something developers don't like to do. And again, it's something I think AI can do fairly well. So this is something that is good. I would be worried about AI writing documentation that has hallucinations in it, but hopefully that's not going to be an issue and it'll be really good. This especially is good for legacy code bases. So if you're working in a super old code base, it's probably not going to be very well documented, and you could just generate some documentation for that legacy code base, and that could be very helpful in sort of working through that code base. And thinking of legacy code bases, QDeveloper is also getting a lot of new capabilities around modernizing legacy code bases. It's already very good at this for Java specifically, but it's getting new abilities. And one of the more important ones I saw was specifically for .NET applications. If you have a Windows.NET application and you want to upgrade to Linux, this is something that's actually very difficult to do. It can take a lot of time, and QDeveloper is claiming it can make this process 4 times faster for you. So that is a huge, huge win if that's actually the case. And the last thing I wanted to talk about with QDeveloper is they're actually integrating it into GitLab. So if you happen to use GitLab for your version control, then you're going to have a lot of new AI-powered capabilities that could be very interesting. I actually got the opportunity to speak with a VP at GitLab. So let's go over to that clip and he can explain it much better than I can. All right, so I'm here with Emilio Salvador. He is the Vice President of Strategy and Developer Relations at GitLab, who just today at Amazon or AWS Reinvent announced a partnership with Amazon for the QDeveloper to integrate it sort of within GitLab. So first thing I wanted to talk about is just what exactly that's going to look like. Like, how is QDeveloper going to be integrating with GitLab? And you all have GitLab Duo as well. So like how that's all going to be working.
Oh, it's an excellent question. First of all, hey, thanks very much for having me. It's truly a pleasure. And it's been an exciting day. You know, we've been working on this with AWS for months now, and it's finally, great to see it happening. So you're right, is that we have GitLab, we have Duo, and now we have Amazon Q. So how are we bringing all those things together? I think it's easy. We're bringing the best of both worlds. This has truly been a co-engineering effort between the two companies. And the way I see this is that we're bringing developers the best of what we have achieved with Duo and Amazon Q in order to improve the overall developer experience. So there's a few things that you can expect to see. On top of abilities that people see on a daily basis throughout the IDE, it's like code completion, code explanation, tests, all those things. What we announced today in preview is that we're bringing all the new agents that Amazon announced today into GitLab and as part of the overall interface that we have. Let's say that you have a huge project, I don't know, like tens of thousands of lines of code, multiple people working on it, and your goal is to modernize that application using Java. In the past, people used to use the IDE, bring the project, check the code. That's something that you can now do through an agent just from the GitLab UI. You just click on a button and say, hey, modernize my code, and that gets modernized all of a sudden.
So you're essentially automating a lot of these, I guess, like processes that as developers we're doing that are sort of the more tedious tasks. And also, I think some of the things you mentioned are things that I noticed a lot of times as developers, like we want to put our head down and code, and we sort of get some of those steps sometimes. We don't spend as much time on writing the documentation. And when I was at Facebook, there was a big thing of making sure we had a big test plan with all of our pull requests and things like that. I could see a lot of ways that having Q developer and just AI in general there can make that process, one, just easier, faster, better, but also allow developers to do these things that we like doing and have the AI sort of help with these other tasks that we don't like doing as much.
I could not agree more with you. In fact, I think that there was a stat shared earlier today that developers spend less than an hour a day like coding.
Yeah.
And I bet that even some of that hour is spent on things that are not exciting. Right? It's not just about writing documentation, writing tests. Even sometimes you just need to do some refactor someone else's code. And you're like, hey, I just want to spend time coding, but coding for things that are relevant, solving business problems, applying my intellect and coding capabilities to solve a problem. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve here, is that remove all those mundane tasks that are relevant. Don't get me wrong, security, compliance, tests, documentation, those things need to be done for that to work. But eventually the goal is, hey, let's give people time to do the thing that they love the most, coding.
Right. Yeah, and that 1 hour stat was crazy when I saw that too. Like that seems extreme, but when I think back to, especially like the senior and staff and higher level engineers I worked with, it seemed like they got no time to code. And then sometimes you look and it's like magically they had thousands and thousands of lines of code they wrote. And it's like, I don't know when you did this. But it seemed like they were constantly being pulled into basically every code review, which takes just a ton of time sometimes. It seems like that's something that we're going to be able to start finding better and better ways to automate.
And not only better and better ways to automate, but also make sure that people spend the time, the right time in the right things, right? As you are thinking about like code reviews, plenty of those code reviews will be done by AI. There might be some that are worth checking, right? And you want your best people to spend time on those and those only. Those are some of the benefits that we're going to bring, with AI.
And I think also as a human code reviewer, it's sort of different things that we look at versus what AI can look at. Like they talked about finding issues with potential dependencies that you're adding and things like that, which as a human, when I'm reviewing code, that's not something I'm putting a lot of time and effort into, and it's something I'm likely to miss. Whereas I'm likely to catch things where it's like, there's a mistake in the business logic, whereas that's something harder for AI to catch just because the AI might not even know exactly what the expected output in business logic is. So I could see a world where we're sort of coming together and using both AI and humans to code review, and we just get sort of a much better result overall.
Developers, the role of developers are going to be even stronger than ever before, right? I think why? Because we're going to have the best people with the best intellects working on the things that matter the most. And AI is going to enable them to spend the right time doing those things. And it's also going to help junior developers. I mean, to your point, sometimes good quality, the way people review quality, it takes some cases is, hey, business logic is wrong, but in some of the cases is that, hey, this is how we develop code here. These are our guidelines. AI can help with that.
Yeah. So you mentioned junior developers, and that's sort of a big group of my audience. And I know a lot of people are, while excited about these things, also sort of scared of them, especially junior developers, people maybe in college going to get a computer science degree or learning to code in a boot camp or wherever they're doing that, out of sort of a fear of like, well, it seems like this AI is getting better and better. Like, is it almost at a place where we don't even need these junior developers? Or is that a reasonable fear? Or is it sort of the case that we will always have developers working alongside these AI tools?
We envision a world where we'll have developers working like full time and getting help from AI. As a helper, not as a substitute. Hey, we all had the junior developers in the past, and sometimes just basically kicking something off takes time, or sitting down in front of a project and he's like, I don't even know what this thing does. Just getting AI to explain you what that piece of code is doing is going to help you be more productive and basically deliver value faster.
Yeah.
Which is eventually the goal. Our goal is about shipping software faster and more secure.
Yeah, exactly. I think the faster thing is interesting because when we look back at other technology that's sort of like massively changed this industry, like we've had in the past, it was high-level programming languages, right? It was the invention of languages like C and eventually Java and C++, C++ and JavaScript and Python and all these languages that made development much, much faster. And we also had things like IDEs and tools like GitLab that all made development much faster. And the result of all of those things wasn't less developers, it was more output.
That's right. I mean, we heard this before, is that every company is a software company.
Yeah.
So the developers are needed, and they will be needed. Even if you think about AI, there are developers behind that.
Yeah.
Developers, data scientists. In fact, I think that the role of developers is going to be more critical than ever before.
Looking forward a little bit further with GitLab and just the industry as a whole, I'm curious to hear, like you mentioned developing things faster.
Yeah.
What do you see as sort of like a 5, 10, 15-year horizon of like what should we expect as like more and more tools that GitLab's providing and that AI in general can provide developers?
I see an opportunity to change even the way we think about applications. Years ago, we used to have like in the terminal view, there was like just text all over. Eventually moved to the web. Then we had apps. And I see probably 3 to 5 years from now, even that the application paradigm is going to shift, right? What if the AI agent becomes the app, right? Even if you think about applications today that you have your keyboard, your mouse, there's been so much progress with natural language that eventually all you have to do is talk. And that will change the way applications are built and the way those applications interact with users. So I feel that we're going to see a huge ecosystem or agents that can talk to each other in order to accomplish tasks.
A lot of my audience is early in their careers, if not haven't started their career yet. Sort of a last question I always like to ask is, what advice would you give to them? One, just in terms of, like, you've obviously had a very successful career in the industry, like just in terms of being successful in this industry. And then 2, in terms of specifically this future that is in some ways uncertain and we don't know exactly what things are going to look like what can they be doing to sort of future-proof themselves and just have a successful career?
Computer science is no longer the thing that I studied. I mean, you gotta combine, you truly need to understand how to develop, but in the context of data, combining what data scientists and developers do today is bulletproof. You are gonna be able to build amazing application, understanding machine learning, understanding how AI models work, basically be able to fine-tune them and work with them in a way that drives business value. And eventually, the value comes, the more I think about this, the more I realize that a programming language is just a tool.
Exactly.
The power comes from the brain behind that, right? It's like writing. I mean, there are words, but eventually you need to put them together in a way that makes sense.
Never describe yourself as like a Java developer, JavaScript developer, Python developer, because you're sort of saying like, I'm just a person who uses a tool. That's like somebody saying I'm like a hammer user, right? Like
yes, right.
It's a tool that you're saying that you know how to use, but if you develop software engineering fundamental skills, then you can use any of the different
You can
tools.
use it, right. And what you have is something very few people have. You have the ability to solve business problems using technology.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
As you might expect, a lot of the focus has been on AI, especially generative AI, as well as sort of ways that we can train bigger and better models to do different AI applications. And that, I think, is going to be the trend of a lot of tech keynotes and just a lot of tech advances over the next few years. So the biggest announcement I saw here was with the announcement of EC2 Trainium 2 instances. So if you don't know, Trainium is a chip that Amazon actually developed that is sort of geared towards training data for these big AI models. And there's a new Trainium 2 chip that we can use on EC2, and they're claiming it's going to be 30 to 40% more price effective, which effectively means that we can build better models with it. And there's also what they call Trainium 2 Ultra servers, which is essentially 4 Trainium 2 instances altogether, which is 64 total Trainium 2 chips, which effectively means a lot of compute power. And interestingly, they also mentioned that Anthropic is using Trainium 2 to build what they're calling the largest computer ML cluster ever. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and if they're able to make a significantly better model than they already have, because Anthropic, as a lot of us know, have some of the best models already. All right, so moving on to storage, they talked a lot about ways that they can improve S3, which is sort of the cloud bucket storage of AWS. And this is one where it feels like a product that's in a way sort of done, right? Like it works very well, a lot of people use it, and there's not a whole lot of issues with it, but they did find what I think is actually a very substantial issue, and were able to solve for it pretty well. And that's going to be an issue around metadata, which oftentimes, especially as you're working on smaller projects, metadata doesn't feel that important, right? This is all of the extra data associated with your files. So for example, if you have an image, this is data like where the image was taken and what time it was taken at. So it's not the actual data of the image, it's the metadata, it's the extra
extra data associated with it. And this data is super important for being able to search, right? So they use the analogy of like on your iPhone, you want to be able to search for photos I took last Thanksgiving or last Christmas. And the way you can do that is because they have so much metadata that their search is able to actually use that metadata and find those files for you. But on S3, oftentimes we have a ton of data and sometimes we have metadata, but if we do, we have to sort of manually manage all that metadata and it can become very difficult and cumbersome. Whereas now they're introducing what they're calling S3 metadata, and essentially this is just them automatically doing this for you. So essentially they added something called S3 tables, and these are sort of iceberg tables within S3, and they're going to be using those under the hood to store this metadata for you, which should make your data in S3 much easier to actually search for, which is very important when you have these super large data sets. And thinking about data, they also talked a lot about databases and making databases scale better. So specifically, there's sort of this issue with scaling specifically to multiple regions. So if you have a bunch of different regions, so your application is working globally, and all of those regions need to have strong consistency, meaning that the data is the same everywhere at all times, that can actually be very slow because it requires a lot of different trips to all of these different servers in different parts of the world, which just takes a lot of time, right? This is capped at the speed of light, but even that is sort of faster than we're oftentimes able to do things. But they created something called Aurora DSQL, so distributed SQL, which they claim has virtually unlimited scale, zero infrastructure management, 5 nines of availability, strong consistency, PostgreSQL compatible, and is going to be 4 times faster than alternatives because they found this sort of fancy way to minimize some of these trips back and forth that we were previously doing. And they also found a way to do multi-region strong consistency within DynamoDB as well. So this is going to be something we can use within SQL as well as NoSQL. I'm still sort of thinking in my head and trying to figure out exactly how this all works. It feels sort of magic and like this magic box to me right now. But if it does work, as well as I said, it's going to work in the keynotes, this is going to be a big game changer for these multi-region, large-scale applications.
So I'm here with Adam Seligman. He's VP of Developer Experiences at AWS. So first of all, just a big thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. I know you have a talk to give in a few minutes, so thank you so much for taking a few minutes to chat with us. I wanted to start by talking a bit about QDeveloper because there's been a lot of announcements at reInvent around QDeveloper, and I think it's sort of moving in a direction that I like a lot. I've talked a lot on my channel about different AI tools and some approaches I like, some I don't like. And one thing I like a lot is this announcement y'all made around these new AI sort of agents that it has where it can do documentation, code review, essentially this idea that we have these like very specific tasks. So I'm curious to hear like your idea of how you see these things being used by developers, maybe how it's being used at Amazon already and how you've seen people actually use it.
Well, we've been experimenting with this technology just like everybody else for the last couple of years. And we have a lot of software engineers at Amazon and a big customer and developer community. So we all kind of started with a coding assistance use case. But as our engineers started experimenting, they discovered that generative AI could help them in lots of other areas of software development. It turns out, sadly, most professional engineers inside a company only get to spend an hour or somewhere around there a day actually writing code. But they have all these other tasks they have to do, writing documentation, understanding code that maybe came from somebody else that they're not familiar with. So over the last year, we took Q, we like rubber banded it out and then built a bunch of agents to help with all the other facets of software development over the whole life cycle. So what used to be a product that in this category, there's just coding assistance, we actually like stretched it to do the entire software development lifecycle, be an expert across that whole life cycle.
As a developer, like the better and better you get, the more experience you get, you really don't spend that much time like implementing the actual logic you've come up with. Like you spend time like coming up with ideas and figuring out like what exactly a system is going to look like. But once you have that idea, the actual coding part isn't a huge time sink. Oftentimes the big time sinks are the things that you're talking about that feel very sort of automatable in unit testing and documentation and all of that. And also this idea of documentation for legacy code bases. Like when you go to some code base, and I've had a few times where I've been working at some company and they mention, oh yeah, there's this part of their code base that so-and-so wrote, but he doesn't work here anymore, so nobody really understands it that well. And having AI that can go in and just write a bunch of documentation after you have this legacy code base, that could be like super, super useful.
Yeah, the rude way to talk about it is legacy code. The respectful way is heritage code. You know, like it's built and it's there and everybody like respects it but doesn't want to touch it. So QDeveloper has some great features, writing documentation on existing code. My team did some testing of it right before that agent released in the last couple of weeks, and they were super delighted at what they found. It's also interactive too. So like the first shot of how we write docs, how the Q agent writes docs may not be the way you want to write docs, and you can give it feedback and go adjust the docs, which are pretty cool. But yeah, I think it's a really good way to look at it. I bet your listeners, know this and will discover this as they grow in their careers, that you learn coding at maybe the diamond heart of the fun part, like the core, like learning a language and using a library and writing some code. But the job has all this other stuff to get that code all the way up to production and keep it up while millions of users use it, and then update it over time, because the library you use when you're in school is probably going to change 6 times before you get out into the job. And that dependency management and upgrades and maintenance and migration turns out to be a big part of the task in a lot of companies and corporate setting. We just want Q to make that work fun. Yeah. Why make it a slog? Why can't we use generative AI to help developers tackle that stuff?
What are the things that we as humans are particularly good at that we will need to be doing versus what are the things that AI is particularly
Yeah. There's this trope I see. Developers go away, robots are taking over the world, and everything will be self-driving. I don't think that's real, and I don't think that's what the real experts see how things are going. What's happening is we're getting better tools with better assistance. These generative AI tools like Q can help you learn things faster than ever before, which is exciting too. So I'm super bullish on where things are going to go for developers, and there's massive demand for cloud solutions and software and generative AI technologies like in our everyday lives. So it's a really bright day for developers right now.
Final question just to wrap up that I always like to ask people is, what just like general advice would you have as far as just having a successful career in this industry?
May I offer 2 things?
Of course.
I think it's a little daunting, Tanner. Like there's all this like techie mumbo jumbo. There's all this knowledge you have to know before you get a seat at the table, right? Like I certainly felt that, like, I'm always behind. There's always new stuff. I just want to say that's a normal feeling for your viewers if you're new to tech. That's okay. We're all always learning in this. We get wisdom and skills and stuff along the way, but I think early career people and young people are totally valued. Learner's mind, that agile mindset, growth mindset will just carry with you your whole career. So I'd encourage people to be as your listeners, be really fearless and don't be afraid about trying stuff, going for that internship and building things for fun and tackling new technologies. It's okay to say you don't know how to do something yet, because you'll learn it in a day or a week. And then suddenly you'll have that skill for life. And then a second one. It's a really neat time in open source right now, because open source has just been utterly embraced by the cloud and by companies. Everybody wants open source. It's the first port of call. It's just the great way to start and build systems knowing you got a good investment. There's a community around the technology. Open source needs contributors. Open source needs maintainers. Open source needs documenters and feedback. It's a really great way for people to get started in their career. You can find an open source project that is interesting to you and start helping. It might be finding some area of functionality you wish it had and giving notes on that. It might be implementing functionality. It might be looking over code that's contributed, giving feedback on it. It's a really neat way to start. It's a really great way to get hands-on. The community will appreciate it. I did it when I was doing open source in the 90s. I was in grad school. It was like Linux and the desktop, all this cool stuff that you could never do before. So it opened a lot of doors for me. I'd encourage your readers, your listeners. It's not scary. There are all sorts of different open source communities and projects. Find something that captures your intention and spend a little time on it. I think you'll be, well rewarded for it.
Awesome. That's amazing advice and a great way to end it off. So thank you so much, by the way.
Thanks so much for coming. I hope you have a great reInvent.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cheers.
All right, so we're about to check out the Sports Forum, which is essentially a big demonstration of all of the ways that AWS is being used throughout sports, professionally and elsewhere, to create better products for viewers and for the athletes. Course creator, isn't that what I do? Really, this is to build a custom golf course using AWS. So let's try it out. All right, let's choose a biome: grassland, forest, tropical, mountain, desert. We're in Vegas, so we'll go for the desert. Select next step. All right, Amazon Code Whisperer is trained on billions of lines of code. All right, choose the weather: sunny, cloudy, rainy, snowy. I live in Seattle, it's always gotta be rainy. Next step. What should inspire the name of your course? Let's say subscribe. Generate poster. Add your signature to the course. I just kind of scribble for signatures, not gonna lie. I don't have a real signature. Maybe I should fix that. Generating your course. Since Amazon SageMaker launched in 2017, we've added more than 380 capabilities and features. Ready to print your artwork? Print now. Sunscribe instead of subscribe, my AWS course. All right then. I'm here with Adnan Ijaz, who leads the product for Amazon Q Developer. We're here at Amazon Reinvent, where they just announced a ton of cool new features with Q Developer. So thank you, first of all, for taking the time to chat for a little bit.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So first I wanted to talk about Q Developer and sort of initially just like how are we seeing, or how are you seeing people actually using it so far? Like what are engineers at Amazon using it for so far? What are you seeing engineers elsewhere use it for? Like what is sort of the benefit people are finding so far from it?
Yeah. So for your audience, I would briefly start by talking about what is Amazon Q Developer. So it's the generative AI assistant for automating all aspects of software development lifecycle. It's the most capable generative AI assistant that can help you across all aspects of software development lifecycle. And what does that mean? Too often we think about software as just the act of writing code, and that will say, that's it. But there is a lot more to it. We're finding out they spend, on average, an hour writing code every day. Yeah. Where are they spending rest of the time? They're spending rest of the time with other activities of software development lifecycle, whether they're writing unit tests, whether they're documenting the code that they wrote, whether they are code reviewing the changes that their team member might have made. So there are a whole bunch of things that they have to do other than writing code. What we look at with Amazon Q Developer, we're taking a broad-based approach on how do we help developers with all aspects of software development. So it's very capable assistant that can help you with the coding, but it can help you with all aspects of software development lifecycle.
A code review is super interesting to me because it's, I think, one of the areas of the software development lifecycle that developers aren't very good at. A lot of developers hate it. At least in my experience, there's a lot of times you put up a pull request and you tag somebody to review it, and like 2 minutes later it's approved, and it's like, you didn't really put a lot of effort into this, did you? So many outages that I've seen could have been and should have been caught at the code review stage, but didn't get caught. And I could see a world where Q Developer, really just AI in general, will have the ability to catch a lot of things that we as humans aren't catching. And those two things could work really well together. If you added some dependency that has some known issue about it, like as a code reviewer, if I see a new dependency added, I'm not going to do some deep dive on this new dependency to check that it's like good to be using right now, and that we have the right version of it and all of that. So it's something that I think could be a super useful tool.
Yeah, you're spot on. You talked about you send a pull request and you get code reviews in 5 minutes. So that's one extreme. And then there's another extreme, which is equally not good, is like it takes a week for somebody to come back to you. That person has to find time to review your code. You're just waiting for them to come back. And oftentimes they're going to find issues that are, that AI is able to find very quickly at the source while you're writing the code. Is like, hey, you should fix this. So the intent is that the agent will make it easy for you to identify those issues at the source, fix those, and then you can send it to an actual human with all the changes and the fixes that it generated and feedback incorporated. And maybe then it might take them a few minutes to review it and see what changed and do their own process. And so the entire process is expedited like that way.
A lot of my audience is sort of, like we mentioned, sort of computer science students, boot camp students, new grad software developers, or even sometimes people just thinking about getting into software development. And I know a lot of people see these AI tools and it's super cool, right? Like it's exciting, but at the same time, it creates some fear, right? Because it seems like AI is getting better and better at the thing that for a long time has been our job. How do you see like the future going in terms of like software development as a career? Like, is the career just going to change? Is it going to exist at all? Like, what exactly do you see as like the future?
I expect developers and software engineers to be spending more time on creative activities. The capabilities that I talked about, I mean, you would be hard pressed finding somebody who would say, I really enjoy writing documentation for my code, right? Or I really enjoy doing code reviews for my peers, and while I have my own deliverables. You would see that across the board, there are a number of activities in the software development lifecycle, which is undifferentiated heavy lifting, as we call it. These are tedious activities that nobody kind of likes to do, but have to be done. And that is where we feel like these generative AI assistants are going to play a big role. So you as a developer, as you will be spending a lot more time thinking about the design, thinking about the creative part of it, which you really enjoy. And then all that undifferentiated heavy lifting is left to this AI assistant.
One sort of final question on that note, what should people in my audience or anybody in general, if they're getting into this field, what types of things do you think they should be doing as they're learning to sort of future-proof themselves, if that makes sense, and be ready for this sort of AI wave that is now becoming a big part of software development? And more generally, if there's any other advice you have for people who might be just starting in this field, and just what types of things you would advise if you were going back to college now and we're trying to get into software development?
The advice that if I were to have it for myself, if I were actually going through the school right now, is the way we do software development is changing in a very profound and fundamental way. But it is a good thing. Generally, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of aspects today in software development lifecycle which are not fun, which is like tedious, and that part is going to go away. So, but the concepts, understanding the basics of computer science, of the software engineering, that part is the constant. That's not going to change. Focusing a lot more on that, you are able to leverage, and I would say embrace the assistants, the AI assistants that are out there, get up to speed, see what they can do. So embracing that change, I think, is the best way to go, because that is what's happening. And the technology in the space is evolving very quickly. So I'm looking forward to where we would take this, but the underlying theme is focus on the creative and the learning part of the computer science software engineering, knowing fully well that AI assistants will really address the undifferentiated part where you don't have to necessarily worry about it as you come out in the real world and start doing the job.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's great advice. So let's go ahead and end it here. And I appreciate you so much for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so that's going to do it for AWS Reinvent 2024. This was an amazing event, so big shout out to Amazon for bringing me out here, and of course for sponsoring this video, and I will see you all in the next video.